couple of years back, I played this game without really knowing much about it, known as Granblue Fantasy Versus. This game intrigued me because I was told about how much RPG influence the game itself had, and how it was inspired by a mobile game. Same game that also happened to have this collab with Persona 5, which is the only reason I even knew what Granblue Fantasy was at the time. So of course, I played it, and I honestly was confused at the time because the story immediately starts off with these already established characters and people already having pre-established relationships with one another without me really knowing who each and every single one of these characters was. So, of course, it was hard to get into the story at first because I had absolutely no clue what was happening, as you would expect. Surprisingly, though, this game series is actually very forgiving in that nature. It fully expects that for certain players, many people have not played the mobile game, and will actually go over details of these characters' stories within each respective story. Or if you want, you could look through the character bios to get a better understanding of how they know one another through these already pre-established relationships that were already done in mobile games. Or if you really want to, you can always just watch the Granblue Fantasy anime, which the first 7 episodes are up on YouTube by the official account for Granblue Fantasy. I highly encourage this if you really want to get into this series, by the way. But even if I didn't understand the story and characters, what drew me into Versus was how in-depth this RPG mode really was. This was a fighting game first and the RPG second, yet the RPG felt like it was its own game. Sometimes I actually forgot I was playing a fighting game and would just occasionally lose myself in grinding, mixing, upgrading, and just doing all kinds of things with the different weapons, characters, and mixing and matching sort of things in order to build a perfect setup in order to fight against the harder bosses. And it was fun just kind of losing hours to that. And then you have boss fights. In-depth boss fights with their own different raid-like mechanics that felt so different from the usual fighting game trope of boss fights are unfair, as the game gives you the necessary tools to succeed. And honestly, each boss felt so fun to fight against. It felt like you truly were playing this beat-em-up RPG game. And if you weren't someone who was the most skilled at fighting games, you were able to get away from that and actually have a fully in-depth game on your own to play without any worries, to be honest. As there was also a co-op mode, meaning that if you really needed help, you could always call a friend to assist you. And yeah, this included the beat-em-up segments and the different towers that you climbed, the raid bosses that would show up occasionally. There was just so much RPG elements within this game that it felt like it was capable of spawning its own genre, being a fighting game RPG hybrid. And I'm glad to see a lot more of that happening in Versus Rising, especially with all the different mini games and all that. So I guess the question is, how does Relink handle this? And how does Relink handle all the elements that we've already seen in Versus? As many people have not played the mobile game, as I've already established, meaning that a lot of people's first exposure was through Versus, much like mine. And to already start off, Relink already goes above and beyond what I expected, especially seeing how popular it got in such a short time. For a relatively unknown series still, really gives me a lot of hope, especially with how Versus being so popular spawned Versus Rising. I expect great things for Granblue Fantasy Relink, and how, since many people already love the game for what it is, I hope to see the company continue going in this direction forward, even through the fighting game, even through Relink, where more of their storylines and characters get translated to a format where everyone can play. One thing I like about Relink above Versus is how Gran and Jita are both playable characters from the start, and you could interchange between the two of them, considering they are meant to be the main protagonists and essentially the same person. I didn't like the fact that Jita felt like she was sidelined to DLC, when many people do like playing as either one of these characters, as they were each bright characters in their own right, and it felt very odd to see one be left out while the other was given spotlight, not only just the anime, but in another big game, which was people's first exposure to this series through console. This issue has been fixed and rising, and I'm glad to see that, but it's nice to see Relink already allowing you to choose who your captain will be from the start, and not locking you behind that decision. If you ever want to change which character you're playing as, it's very quick change, and it's very similar to how the mobile game operates. Relink's visuals at the start and to the finish have been nothing but spectacular. There have been different overhauls taken, as the game does look vastly different from how it originally started. While there is a similar style, there's a lot more polish to be seen in the character models and the background designs than there was in the older footage you would see from 2016 or 2018 of the game. While not necessarily directly anime, it manages to blend that animation style with the 3D CGI character models in a way that's very hard to pull off for a lot of games, as either one leans too far to the 2D side or has to lean far into the 3D side, almost feeling like it's lost that animation quality. I feel like Relink is one of those games that has found that good mix between the two and allows you to see just beautiful visuals from all different spectrums, whether it is through true animation or through any of its cutscenes that you'll see throughout this 20-hour game. And yes, the main story isn't that long for many RPG enthusiasts, but there is a good reason behind that. When it comes to Granblue, a lot of the main story is generally just big plot related stuff, meaning that a lot of character development you'll usually find in Fate episodes, which in their own right are actually story segments geared towards specific characters. And they are directly related to the story, as you'll see in this game. You do need to make story progress to unlock some of these segments. And due to the fact that this game is 20 hours, the story kicks off almost immediately. What starts to be a quest to fight off hordes of goblins to save people from a town spawns into this grand adventure to save the world from godlike beings and such. Nothing too out of the ordinary for this crew. But, of course, you're asking yourself, well, who is this crew and why are they so important? What makes them so special exactly? Well, that very question is answered in Fate episodes, as I mentioned earlier. The Fate episodes start as introductions to the crew and how they meet the captain and what exactly makes them as powerful as they are. Each crew member has their own in-depth backstory, as well as reasoning behind why they're here in the first place, as well as the Fate episodes going into what each crew member did during the events of the stories and how they contributed to helping out the people of this new skydom known as the Zega Grande skydom. The game incentivizes you to actually watch through these Fate episodes by giving stat boosts and sigil slots, which when you play the game, you'll see sigil slots as these little boosts for your inventory in order to make you stronger beyond the current level you are. It's important for the endgame grind for Granblue Fantasy, so you're going to want to sit through at least the character you're going to play as and watch all their Fate episodes in order to fully understand who they are and what their motivations might be. So now we get to the main point of Granblue Fantasy. Outside of the story, you have quests. At first, quests are going to feel limited as you get a very few to the start and as you go on, and that's just due to the fact that the main focus will be finishing the story before focusing on any quests that you might be completing. A lot of quests will involve you fighting boss fights, but the early on ones are very diverse in smaller groups of enemies, soldiers, goblins, wolves, what have you against these monsters. But as you go on, you will be fighting more and more boss monsters that get increasingly more difficult as the quests go on, to the point where you even go above the max level for each characters, and you are fully expected to be able to fight these monsters with ease. And it's not that it's impossible. In fact, you can fight harder enemies or enemies that are levels above you and win. You just need to be able to put forth the effort to learn how each character works in your party and building them out to be the optimal levels in order to face these monsters, or at least have the good enough equipment to survive long enough for the monster to get beaten. Which may sound silly, but 9 out of 10 times that was the strategy I use, and trust me, it works. And of course, speaking of boss fight, most boss fights are introduced to you in the story at first, meaning that you will get prior experience to facing them before facing them off in a quest. And the presentation for the pre-boss fight room is always going to be so spectacular. It makes you realize what you're walking into, how dangerous this creature is about to be that you're going to face. You're given these slight displays of power and glimpses into their full strength, but never shown the full extent of how strong a monster is about to be. Because once you're in a beast's domain, you will see exactly what you're in for. And frankly, each and every single boss is so fun to fight in this game. I have generally no complaints about any of the boss fights. And each arena feels very fitting for the creature you're facing, and how you need to take different approaches to fighting the different monsters. Some are much more straightforward, and some do require you to do different tasks in order to fully succeed against that monster in particular. And I say monster as a general term, as they are called primal beasts in the game, but without the explanation as to why, it would just sound confusing if I just randomly started calling them primals. The game also gives you a quick look at the main antagonists that you will be facing off against. Without necessarily showing who they are, you get a general idea of how strong they are, as how, and I say this as kindly as possible, effortlessly they bring down your entire crew after you just faced off against what was one of the primals in this game. And frankly, I have never seen a crushing defeat on this degree before, but you quickly pick yourself up from this. So, with that being said, the story of Relink is actually very good at what it does, and that's prepare you for the onslaught of enemies you will be facing in quests to come. But it also feels very fitting for fans of this series. It feels like a love letter of sorts to those who actually know a lot about Granblue Fantasy, and frankly, if you are a huge fan of the series, you will love what this story has to offer you. Because once it's over, you will be spending a lot more time in the quests and the after story segments, and frankly, that's where the majority of my hours have gone to, as I have over hundreds of hours in this game already. And honestly, I would not change it a bit. This is absolutely one of the best action RPGs I've played in a long time, and easily one of the best co-op RPGs to jump into friends with. And I highly recommend it for anyone that either wants to get into the series, knows a lot about the series, or generally just has an affinity for these styles of games. So yeah, that's all I have to say about this game. Only thing I can really add is play it, please. I highly recommend it. And with that, we are done here. Thank you for listening. Now, this next part is going to be a quick bonus segment. However, quick warning, there's going to be massive story spoilers ahead. So, if you don't want to see that, or you don't want to get spoiled, please click on the video now as the review is done. And for those of you that have stayed, you've either completed the story or you're not really one to care about spoilers. Well, I guess I can finally talk about this particular aspect. One of my favorite things that Relink has added is the original character, Id. And honestly, he was a complete surprise in my opinion, as I had not expected him to be fully playable near the end of the game, or an unlockable character as a party member. And at first, I wasn't really a huge fan of this character, as I thought he was kind of overrated. But as time went on, I fully grew to appreciate not only his playstyle, but how he was portrayed as a character. And I have over majority of my playtime dedicated to playing as Id, as he was just such a fun character to play with. Easily one of the best playstyles I've seen in the game, and probably one of the most fun party members you will have on your team. But of course, you do need to beat the game in order to unlock him, and frankly, I hope to see him in more Granblue media. And with that being said, that is completely it for my review. All these elements are things that I really love to see in Granblue Fantasy. I hope to see more from Granblue Fantasy. I hope Relink is a step forward for the series, and they end up doing more in this style. It's not just a one-off, well, we had our action RPG, because I really do love what the company has put together for this, and frankly, it's just easily a top 5 game for me as a whole. There's no debate about it, and that's it. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you all in the next one.